So every so often in sport there's that thing that hits you right in the feels, and it's always too soon to talk about it. Doesn't matter if it's 12 months, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, it always hurts. And it will hurt just as much now as it did then. There's things like Toyota's breakdown at Le Mans just one lap from the end. There's Massa being champion for just 38.907 seconds. Senna's weird disqualification from the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix, Hakkinen breaking down on the last lap of the 2001 Spanish Grand Prix, among others. But this one is going to hurt, because if it had ended the way it should have done, then it would have been one of the most popular wins in a very, very long time. So, here we go then. The time Damon Hill's arrows broke down near the end of the 1997 Hungarian Grand Prix. The 1997 season was a season I remember watching as a kid. Most of the races being in Europe meant that we in England would be having our Sunday lunch while the races were on, so the sounds of Murray Walker, Martin Brundle, V10s and V8s in some cases, mixing with the smells of Mum's roast pork, it's all burned into my memory banks. Williams clinging on for dear life at the top, Ferrari on the way back, Benetton slipping down the field and McLaren winning races for the first time since 1993. In fact, David Coulthard had won McLaren's first race in 4 years at the season-opening Australian Grand Prix, and would win again in Monza later that season. But the fight was between Villeneuve and Schumacher. Schumacher was leading the championship by 10 points coming into this round at the Hungaroring, after Williams had not managed to exploit a Renault power advantage at Hockenheim. As it stood at this point, Villeneuve had won 4 races and Schumacher 3, but Villeneuve had dropped more points through retirements compared to the Ferrari man. Schumacher also had a new chassis this weekend, a 310B that was a lot lighter than the previous version, which was going to be worth something in the region of about 0.3 of a second per lap. But the heat in Hungary that year would put all the teams in a difficult spot for the race. In these days, there wasn't the tyre rules that we know today. Use 2 compounds in the race. In those days, you selected a compound for use in qualifying, and then you had to use that compound for qualifying and the race. So the quandary was pretty simple. Pick the softs which were good for 1 lap and then have them get blistered to high hell during the race, or whack on some harder tyres which last longer but will be slower in qualifying. And at Hungary, track position is key. The other thing to remember here is that this was the first year of the tyre war between Goodyear and Bridgestone, and currently Goodyear had the upper hand, but at the same time Bridgestone was supplying the lower end teams. One of those teams was Arrows, a team that had been around for about 25 years at this point, but in the entire lifetime it had been on the grid, it had achieved a best result of 2nd. The team had been known as Footwork for a few years in the 1990s, and for this season had a new owner in Tom Walkinshaw, who had bought the team from team founder Jackie Oliver during the 1996 season. And driving for the team this year was 1996 champion Damon Hill, with unrated Brazilian Pedro Diniz bringing family wealth and sponsors to help pay for Hill's salary. And Arrows had been having a terrible time of things. Diniz didn't qualify for the season opener in Australia, but was allowed to race due to Villeneuve's absolutely mental pole time. Hill had only just managed to scrape his way into the 107% cutoff, but didn't take the start because of the car breaking down before the race had even started. Diniz had only finished twice all season, while Hill had been dragging the car to knocking on the door of the top 10 when the car wanted to finish. So imagine the surprise on everybody's face when the qualifying times came in, and at the end of the 1 hour session, Hill's Arrows was sitting 3rd on the grid. 3 and a bit tenths off Schumacher and less than 2 tenths off Villeneuve. He'd outqualified Villeneuve's teammate Frentzen, the 2 McLarens of Hakkinen and Coulthard, the other Ferrari of Eddie Irvine, and also the 2 Benettons of Berger and Alesi. I mean, it has to be said at this point though, Frentzen had taken the harder rubber for the weekend. The next Bridgestone runner was Barrichello in the Stewart, down in 11th. However, that shock might not have happened if things had happened slightly differently earlier that season. Another track where Bridgestone had the upper hand was at Argentina, where Olivier Panis had been chasing down Villeneuve in a vastly out of favour car, made competitive thanks to the Bridgestones working on the twisty track in warm weather. Had Panis not broken his legs at Montreal, it could have been Panis that we've been talking about today, and not Damon. The Bridgestones definitely had the upper hand in the hotter conditions, and Damon was able to beat Villeneuve off the line and then start chasing down Schumacher, who led the race. By lap 4, Schumacher led from Hill, who was a second back. Then it was Irvine, Hakkinen, Villeneuve and Frentzen. By the end of the next lap, Hill had taken 0.6 of a second off Schumacher and had set the fastest lap of the race by this point. Now admittedly, Schumacher was running the heavier 310B in the race after damaging the newer, lighter chassis in the warm-up, but even still, the car was struggling in the heat. At the end of lap 5, Schumacher had set a 120.8, Hill a 120.1. While the Bridgestones had less immediate grip, they lasted longer due to Bridgestone's softer compound being harder than Goodyear's. Behind all of this, Hakkinen and Villeneuve managed to get past Irvine, who was struggling with the balance of his tyres, but it was initially believed to be a slow puncture. At the front, meanwhile, Schumacher was holding everybody up, and the top 4 were separated by less than a second. At the start of lap 11, Schumacher got a kick of oversteer coming out of the final corner, and Damon took his chance. He slipstreamed the Ferrari down the start-finish straight, and then lobbed it into turn 1. Murray Walker lost his mind over this overtake, and by the end of the next lap, Damon's tyre advantage was evident. 2.6 seconds was the gap. Then the time difference went up to 3 seconds a lap as Schumacher continued to hold everybody up behind him. And then on lap 14, Villeneuve did exactly the same move on Schumacher that Damon did. Schumacher had driven too hard at the start of the race, and his tyres were blistered. When Hill made his stop, Frentzen was now in the lead, making advantage of his harder Goodyear tyres, and was actually 19 seconds clear of the Arrows with one fewer stop to make, and Frentzen had yet to make his stop. But his fuel tank connector broke, meaning that taking fuel at his stop was going to be impossible, and they had to retire the car. Frentzen had the pace, he had the tyres, and even with Damon's Bridgestone tyres working better, it seems that Frentzen probably would have had the race won. So as it was, Damon continued to lead the Grand Prix from Villeneuve and looked set to take a very popular and unexpected victory, but over the last couple of laps the car started to slow down. He was stuck in third gear. The throttle linkage had completely gone because of a 50p washer failing on the Arrows. On the final lap, Villeneuve caught up and overtook Damon, but the gap between Villeneuve and Damon to the rest of the field was so great that Damon was able to still finish on the podium ahead of Johnny Herbert, who took third in the Sauber. It is easy to say that it was the tyres that did it all, and that was the only reason why Damon was within a shot of winning the race to start with. But while that was a part of it, Damon and Hungary tended to go well together. It was where he won his first Grand Prix in 1993. It was one of the only tracks where he was able to qualify his Brabham in 1992, and it's a track that he typically did well at overall. The tyres did play a part, but the fact remains. That Arrows did not belong at the front of a Grand Prix, but on this particular day, the stars aligned, and we almost had an Arrows winning a Grand Prix. So then, a look at the almost win for Damon Hill at the 1997 Hungarian Grand Prix. If this has brought up some memories, opened up some old wounds, or just been new to you in general, do give the video a like. And if you want to see more from this channel, do get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything I do here. Massive thanks to the kind folk over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help support me at a more personal level, you can do so by following the link in the description, and down there as well you'll also find links to Discord and to Twitter and to stuff like that. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a cracking day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.